I want to welcome you back to another episode of what I branded Pivotal, since these interview style segments tackle impactful CPG industry topics and lessons from the business leaders that live it every day. Hi, name. I'm a big fan of your work and I'm impressed by how you've accomplished, mentioned specific big accomplishment. As someone who wants to be a name professional title too, I'd like to talk to you about how you got started and what advice you can give me. Let me know if you have time to chat. I might not have followed what generative AI suggested that you write or say when you're reaching out to someone you admire, but honestly, it wasn't much different to how I cold approached Doug Miller at a beverage category trade show a few years ago. This wide ranging conversation felt like I was kind of peeling away layer after layer of the onion to reveal not something hidden, but just more authenticity. Doug and I talked through the inspiration behind starting a supplement brand side hustle 2 decades ago and how that decision turned into an expansive business portfolio that now includes specialty retail locations, gyms, and more supplement brands. We also discussed what it truly takes to be successful when leading multiple businesses, being a family man, and making an impact in his community. Moreover, how the maturation of the supplement industry has required everyone to upskill if they want to truly break through. Additionally, why a messy period in American history helped derail his first attempt at scaling an energy drink brand. But before we jump into those interesting topics and many more, I wanted to give a quick shout out to the supporter of this content, Cognizant. I know I sound like a broken record at this point, plus, y'all see that branded beverage cooler over my shoulder in YouTube videos. But whether it's in a convenient energy drink or one of the many supplement products under the Doug Miller business portfolio, like Myoblox, Skywalk, or Unmatched BH2K, the brain energy ingredient Cognizant is a part of my everyday to stay at peak performance levels. To learn more, I'll leave the link to the Cognizant website in this content's description. But without further delay, here's the recent conversation I had with Doug Miller. So I'm definitely not the person that does like a ton of background, but when I was digging around for this episode, I was honestly like a little bit like confused that we both have been in the industry for the same ish amount of time. Yet, unfortunately, or I guess in your case, maybe fortunately, like we don't know each other all that well. but
Mhm.
like we've had a few, I think, brief conversations, especially at some of the recent trade shows. And I've
Yep.
always been, I guess, an admirer from afar of you personally, of what at least I know and what people that I love say really great things about you. So I'm excited about this like conversation. I'm excited to dig in and chat today. So Doug, I mean, I just want to thank you for spending some time with me and giving me some time today.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it. I am one of the ones that follow all your content because it's very relevant for what I do. And I know it's very nichey because
Yeah.
like some of your stuff is way over your general supplement consumer or even just a beverage consumer or whatever. But for me, that's always good stuff. So I love it.
Yeah, I always tell people like I try to shoot for the executive level people, and I know that sometimes if I make great content for them, other people will like it as well. But a lot of it is really just intended for people like you that are in the weeds and are thinking about things from a very high strategic level and like how do we align this and what are we looking at it from like market trends and everything. I'm trying to create content for that, which I don't think is really out there at all. And it's
Absolutely.
really the type of stuff that I like. So let's get into like core nutritionals, because I think that's where at least my understanding is where you kind of started. And I'm interested in like the whole brand arc. I know it's been at this point almost 2 decades, and I'm sure we'll kind of get through a bunch of like key moments and we'll weave it into the conversation. But I want to start with just understanding like the inspiration behind that. Like, what was like, why did you create a supplement brand? Like you could have done anything, obviously. Like, what was the reason for that?
Sure. So, long story short, I'll try to keep this as brief as possible because it is a bit of a story. So, my background's in biochemistry, molecular biology, and economics. That's what I went to school to study.
Okay.
It's kind of a dual major role. And when I graduated school, I went directly into economic litigation consulting. It's very high end, kind of like I did a lot of programming. It was like um, economic analysis, econometric analysis of big legal cases that needed economists, basically. And at the same time, I was really into bodybuilding or lifting
Hmm.
weights, really, right? I was always an athlete, but didn't pursue it in college, competitive sports. So I needed something, and I got hooked on basically bodybuilding. And because of my biochemistry background, this is back, I mean, we're talking, I was in college in the late 90s. I mean, it was all just internet was budding, and I was just on all the message boards trying to figure things out. And I was really into the science of it. And so as I was started to build my career in consulting, at the same time, I had this side passion hobby that was all my other time was basically working out. And I was really not happy with the quality of the supplements out there. Today everything is a non-prop blend. You can really count on quality. All the good things, right? Back then, everything was a prop
Yeah.
blend. It was this crazy marketing, the old Celtec ads, all of that stuff. And it just didn't make sense to me. So working in the high-paced environment I was in, I needed a meal replacement. And there was really nothing on the market besides the EAS Myoblox Metrex shakes that had a bunch of maltodextrin and other things in them that I didn't want. So I developed with a partner at the time. I actually founded this with a partner who I quickly bought out after about a year. Core MRP, which was basically a meal replacement based on oat and barley fiber, a slower digesting blend of protein, higher quality. And basically, I started reinvesting every penny from the sale because I didn't need the money. It was just a hobby. I just wanted it for myself. Reinvested every penny for the sale of the MRP into the next product, which was a post-workout recovery, and then an amino acid. But I wanted certain principles to be in place from day one. That was, doses of ingredients or servings of ingredients based at the efficacious levels that the scientific studies referred to. And then also no fillers, no artificial colors, no prop blends. I mean, this is 2004, right? 20 years ago, prop blends, you don't really find that often anymore. Back then, it was everywhere. And so doing this 20 years ago, it was something different. And that's how we basically started this brand. I started it with a $20,000 investment. It was $10,000 of my own money, $10,000 of my partner's money. And we basically ran one product. We didn't know what the heck we were doing, right? Like we didn't know anything. We found a manufacturer in Jersey, and we basically had to figure everything out ourselves. There was no mentor. There was no, big businessman giving us guidance. We figured everything out ourselves, and we made every mistake under the sun. We did a lot of stupid things. And then really it was I didn't take any money from the company for the first 7 years. Right. I had a great job. I had the golden handcuffs in the position I was in. And so I just reinvested every penny. We started growing the brand. And as I became more successful in natural bodybuilding, eventually winning a couple world championships at a professional level in natural bodybuilding, the brand really started to take hold. It was a grassroots kind of like natural bodybuilding brand. Right. And then it was really right around 2014 when I did an internal basically rebrand and kind of rebranded the whole thing. And I became that world champion that year and won a bunch of even non-drug tested shows, that the brand really took off. And it was that at that time, after working consulting for 12 years, that I was finally at a point where I was like, you know what, I don't need to be doing this anymore. And I got rid of the golden handcuffs and pretty much went all in. And then after that, I mean, things started to really increase in speed, right? Started to build out staff and do other things. And so that's really, long story short, kind of how Core came to be. But then there was a lot of I just have this entrepreneurial spirit. I want to do things myself. I kind of want to do something that's, when I see a hole in the market, I want to do it, right? And so, we started opening retail chain. We have a retail chain of stores that we started opening around 2010. And then, it butted into Merica Labz and all these other spinoff brands, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But really, that's kind of the origin story of Core.
Because you kind of started from not knowing much and whatever, I would assume the at least initial expectations were quite low. So has the brand exceeded that, the Core brand at this point? Like,
Oh yeah.
And I'm sure you've reset ambition levels and they've changed a lot now, and you probably have a much bigger picture or idea of what you want to accomplish. But I'm glad that you walk through some of those earlier steps, because again, it's a lot easier now because there's a lot more information out there, coming from people like me or other content creators, but also just entrepreneurs that have access to kind of telling their story or how they did it and whatever, and contract manufacturers and all the kind of like component levels of creating a brand. There's so many of them out there that you could pretty much throw a rock at it and you'll hit it
Yeah.
in some town at this point. So it's not as hard to kind of find those things. But when you're talking about back 20 years ago, it wasn't as easy to do that. I started in 2006 and I was kind of similar. Like I was an internet person in college that was on bodybuilding.com's forums and things like that.
Yeah.
And because I was in business school, I was interested in talking to the entrepreneurs behind the brand. And this was right at the perfect time when bodybuilding.com allowed the brand owners to start marketing on their forums. So I was that person that was like asking a bunch of questions, not from a product science level, because that wasn't really my thing. It was more, why are you doing this marketing strategy, or why are you doing this, or what's your, margins or whatever. And nobody's really talking about that kind of stuff because that was what I was into. But that's what got me into the space, was through that networking and everything. But I didn't really know anything about the how do you create a product until I kind of got a few steps in there and I realized, mostly it's through contract manufacturers and all these types of things that I think people now just accept and know. But back then it was a lot, I think, not as known. I mean, there were a lot of people that probably were still doing like self-manufacturing.
I was lucky enough at the same time I had Core, I was actually sponsored by USB Labs when they existed, right back in the day. And so they did a lot of things right. They did a lot of things wrong. And I learned from both of their rights and their wrongs there. But, at that time I got put in touch with some really good contract manufacturers that I still use to this day that are some of the best in the country. So that was probably the one thing that did push me to shift some of my manufacturing and things like that. And just the networking it was all grassroots. It wasn't internet. There was no social media. There was nothing, so it was a completely different show then. It was a lot harder for sure.
Yeah. Now you mentioned the nutrition corners, and what I found interesting, because, typically the sequence is that, supplement store owners, they have a store for a while, then somebody introduces them to how do they create private label, and then they go and do that. And some have ambitions to go past the four walls of their stores, but a lot of them just create things for their stores that they know they can make better margin on, that they know their customers want, and they can control elements of it, and it's great for them. But like you said, you did it backwards. Most people
Yeah.
don't start a brand, even though it was kind of a side hustle, and then go and start a supplement store. That's like backwards. Was there a reason for that, or just like you said, you saw a hole and you were like, oh, I need to do this because I think from a service level it's not there, because the accounts that I'm selling to or whatever, the people that I shop with, they don't necessarily do XYZ. Like what was the reasoning behind the supplement stores?
Yeah. So back when we first started, I don't even know what year we actually turned on our own direct to consumer website. We never had a direct to consumer website. So, right, like one of my first two accounts were DPS Nutrition and Bodybuilding.com, which I don't know why Bodybuilding.com gave me a shot. I had one product. I was like, hey, can you sell this? This was like back, I was emailing Jeremy DeLuca. Hey, would
I
you
was gonna say
list this product? And they gave me a shot. And so like those were my two big accounts. And so, but like I wasn't in GNC, I wasn't in any other of the big chains, back the Vitamin Worlds or anything. Like I couldn't play in that realm. So there really wasn't any good mom and pops in the Arlington, Virginia area, right outside of DC. And so it just made sense. I was like, well, I'm making awesome products. More people need to learn about this. I don't have an e-commerce site. So why not put it in a really populated area where I'm relatively well known in the community and see what happens? And so we put it in there. Now we sold 100 other brands, but very quickly, if I was in the store, I'm going to tell my story and why I take this product, right? And very quickly, Core became the number one selling product. And people were loving it and people were seeing results. And it was kind of like a proof of concept. Like, it's not just me, it's like other people were seeing results, right? And then the store became profitable. And then I was like, well, we can do this. We can replicate this, right, in the right communities. And so that's really how it was really an outlet originally to get more people to understand Core and a better place to sell. Because I didn't also, just like I wasn't satisfied with the supplements on the market back in 2004, I really didn't love the quality of the places or the options for people to go to get supplements in a retail setting. it wasn't, a lot of times you would get uneducated staff. So, and there might not be all the products that you want. So our big thing was, best brands, best prices, best service. So we would match a price anywhere it was. So we were pricing more at wholesale when everyone else was pricing much higher. And, we had knowledgeable staff, and, and we had the best brands, and we added that in because we were selling brands that you might not otherwise find in these national chains. And so that was really kind of the impetus of that. And then that was a slow rollout so we opened our first one in 2010. Then it was 2013 when I quit my job. I opened our second one. I had a really good general manager, Carl Frady. He basically started helping me open stores. And so after that, then it was kind of like we opened a store a year for a couple of years. And then one year we're like, all right, we're doing 4 this year. And then we're doing 3 this year. And then we just kept on opening them from there. So right now we have 13 stores.
And I think like when you were first in those stores, I mean, to talk about an ability to get insights from consumers on, everything, just from like what they're asking about, what they're talking about, ingredient wise, everything like that. And then you take that into your own brand and go, maybe there's something here. Maybe I can play around with that or do that, which kind of rolls into a question I always have, because I think, I love CPG. That's my bread and butter. That's what I talk about all the days. And I think about it, a lot of times entrepreneurs are using those packaged goods as like an artistic expression. And I'm always curious, like, how do you think about when you're creating products? Because I know you have a little bit of a science background. We were talking about an ingredient before we hit the record. So like you have a really good understanding of that. But how do you think about the whole process, packaging, the way you're formulating it? Like, how do you approach that kind of expression?
So that has definitely evolved through time, right? And it's evolved not just because of more knowledge that I've gained, but also because the whole industry has changed, right? So back in the day, I mean, if it was up to me, I wouldn't even care what it tasted like. If it was going to make me bigger, stronger, faster, and it was good for you, I was going to take it, right? And so, but then I realized very quickly, I'm not the norm, right? And we would get direct feedback. We started sampling potential products for Core in our store in Arlington and letting them taste it. We did this, our first weight gainer. I mean, it tasted like eating dirt. I was like, this is great. It's got quinoa in it. It's like so healthy and all this. And everyone's like, Doug, you're nuts. Right. And so we brought it out and, it didn't do well at all. And so, through time, we started to learn, that not only do you have to have great formulas, it has to taste amazing. And then beyond that, when I first did labels, I mean, our first label, if I showed it to you, I swear your infant child could have done this on like Word document and printed it on a home printer. That's what it looked like. And now it's all about the textures and the visuals, and it has to appeal, right? And so that's what I think a lot of people, and then there's one step further now. So it's like great formulas, right? It's great flavors, it's great packaging. But now a lot of people have all 3 of those. You need a great story. If you don't have a great story, it doesn't matter how good those other 3 things are, no one's going to buy it, right? The barrier to entry is pretty low right now in this industry. And I feel like everyone wants to have a supplement brand, but it is a lot harder now than it ever has been, because you also have to have that great story. You have to have that influence. I'm lucky that, Core has the benefit of being running up for 20 years, literally grassroots. Like there was no influencer. I was the influencer. I have like 60,000 followers. I'm a nobody world champion natural bodybuilder. No one cares. Right. But it was the grassroots. And now the brand is so much bigger than me. It's become a lifestyle brand. It's the crush it lifestyle. That's what we preach, is giving it your best in everything you do. And that really speaks to people. It's well beyond bodybuilding right now. We have just as many women taking the products as we do men. It's a very premium brand that lives that lifestyle. So that is kind of the story, but that's been a 20-year run up. Now, when you're launching a brand, like we just launched Unmatched, the reason why that's been so successful out of the gate is because there's a real story there. It's Chris Gethin's ethos, right? Like everything about him has been put into this brand. It's vertically integrated into him, and he's got an amazing story and an amazing reputation. And so, I've learned so much through the years, but like you need really those 4 things, to be successful these days. You can't just have a good product. So back in the day, all I cared about is if it would make me bigger. And nowadays I care about everything.
Yeah, it's interesting how the industry has evolved and matured, and the like you mentioned, the barriers to entry has lowered, but then the ability to break through the noise has become a lot more difficult.
Yes.
And it usually comes down to, like you said, I mean, the story. And I think that people, discount, they use the word brand a lot, and really most of the companies in the space sell products, and some of them do okay, and some of them, get forgotten. But very few actually create brands, and they create the stories that are chapters that build that up over time, that create emotional attachments, and have people actually want to be a part of it, and want to be connected to that. That's very, very hard to do, but the word gets thrown around so much because I think it's interchangeable in people's mind. But there are few and far between brands in this space, in really every category, but in the supplement space for sure, because it's just so easy to create a product and sell it on Amazon, or sell it direct to consumer, and find some arbitrage point or something that you can just make a little money, and you feel like you're doing something. But ultimately the staying power is not very long. It's unfortunate because there hasn't been a lot of really long-standing iconic brands that have been built that have been able to sustain over long periods of time. I'm hoping that now that people have kind of matured in the space, and there's a lot more, I think, important sharing of information, and people understand how to learn from other industries that maybe are more advanced or mature, or whatever that is. We've been able to kind of level up, and maybe we'll be able to create some of those more iconic brands. But I think that it's been an interesting evolution over time that I've been watching very closely, and trying to put my flag in here and there to try to help put it in a direction that I think it needs to go. But it's been a wild, just even, like I said, it's 2006, so like 18 years on my end. Like, just even that short amount of time, it seems like the industry has cleansed itself maybe multiple times since then. It's turned into something completely different that's like kind of wild now. It's like playing in these big leagues. The respect level in some of these spaces now are much higher than it used to be, the wild, wild west, and these cowboys out there doing crazy stuff.
Yeah, I mean, one of the big things that I found interesting in this journey has really been that you can be really successful. Like if you're like $1 million brand and you're just like, it's like you and your wife and you're packing orders and you're doing stuff, you could make a great life for you.
Yeah.
Like you really can, right? But it's like I'm just not wired that way. Like
Yeah.
I don't want just a great life, and it's not even about the money for me. In terms of the scale, it's kind of like progress. It's like I pursue progress and I pursue growth, and not like I'm not a guy to go out and buy 4 Lambos or do anything like that. It's not about that really at all. It's about the people, the community that we build, our team that we build, and what I get to be a part of. But I find that it's just like the scaling thing has been the most difficult part, because then once you pass that $1 million mark and then you're doing a couple $1 million a year, you need to hire a lot more people. There's a ton more overhead. Your profitability might go down, but you have to get through that to get to the next part. And then there's another scaling, and the whole scaling process, because every brand has kind of been at a different level. And we have 5 brands now that are all at different kind of spectrums and growth stages. It's a really hard thing to navigate. It's just like when you pour gasoline on the fire and when you're in the right spot, right? It's kind of like that Goldilocks zone. Is finding that Goldilocks zone is the hard part.
Before we transition to some of those other brands you mentioned, I wanted to get your sense also on, we talked about like competitiveness, or I hate the word saturation because I think it's misused a lot of times especially in our space. But thinking about, you mentioned flavor and how important flavor is, but I'm thinking about it from just the licensing side of things. And you guys were arguably not first into that, but I think you've taken an interesting approach to the partners that you've chosen. And I'm sure you guys have some other ones that you're playing around with or looking at or whatever. But I just wanted to get your sense of like how you've approached like picking them, deciding which ones speak to you and kind of embody your brand, and like why you have, just worked with the ones that you have. Because, there's still, I would say, endless opportunities out there. I think people whale hunt too much. There's a lot more, interesting stories
Yeah.
to play out. And it's just a matter of like, how do you weave those in to make those make sense?
Yeah. I mean, so I mean, you probably know how the licensing game works. It's a lot of it's a game and how much you're willing to risk in marketing and
Yeah.
in guarantees, right? Like that's what it comes down to. I'm a little bit more conservative and I don't like whale hunting, right? Like I'm not going to be able to go get Oreo,
Yeah.
right? Because they're going to need a multi-million dollar guarantee. Let's be honest, right? Like that's not something that I'm willing to bet the farm on, is just that one play. So for us, it's been about what makes sense for us from a financial perspective, right? But more importantly, what really speaks to us and gets us excited here, right? Like what is nostalgic to us? What do we think we could do very cool, like have a cool story and tell that story, but also that is very authentic to that brand. There are some licenses out there that they're like, cool, you can have a license, and it wouldn't be that expensive. But you know what? You're just going to use your flavor house to try to match it like ours. There's no story there.
Yeah.
Like, what is that? So this is key. We've turned down. We've had, after the Moose Tracks launch, and Fun Suites, we've had a number of brokers pitch certain deals to us, and we're like, well, how can this be authentic in any way? So for us, the authenticity is really first and foremost. So for Moose Tracks, it was the delivery system. Moose Tracks is an ice cream. Well, we didn't want to get into frozen protein
Yeah.
snacks, but what's the next closest thing? Pudding. I make pudding every night before I go to bed with a mixture of our proteins. So we wanted to come up with that in a Moose Tracks form where we can actually use the inclusions that they put in their ice cream. For Fun Sweets, my kids absolutely love cotton. I think every kid loves cotton
Yeah.
candy. That one, the only way we would do the deal is if we were able to use their same flavor house to flavor it. And our Fun Sweets is super off. It tastes like liquid cotton candy, right? And so all the licensing deals that we do are in the process of doing are very authentic. And we are about to launch our biggest licensing deal ever, is launching in September of this year. And it's the first one that is not a consumable. It's not, it's a different type of licensing deal. But for me personally, this is near and dear to my heart. And what our team is pulling together for this, I think, is literally going to blow people's minds. I think this is going to be one of the most complete, I would say, license collaborations that has ever been done in this industry. I know that sounds like a lot, but there's so many components to this, and then it's such a big project. And quite frankly, when I first found out we actually got the deal, I was completely shocked. Like this is a little bit grander scale than I would have ever hoped for. So I'm really excited to announce that in the coming months. So it's been a lot of work, but the licensing thing has been a really fun project and, part of our business. And, obviously all those licenses do really well.
Yeah. I think that on one level, to your point, it was fun and there was a novelty to it and there was excitement. And then all of a sudden it started to get a little bit, I want to call it like played out, but like I expect with the CPG industry, like there's an iterative nature to it. Like when you see somebody do something, you need to kind of iterate off of that. You need to kind of move forward. And I've argued that I think a lot of the missteps have been not so much of the product side of it. Like most of the products have tasted great. They're, they are fairly close, or if not, as close as you're going to get for the masking of the ingredients with the authentic flavor. But I think what usually people fall on their faces, and even some of the best people that are using brand licenses in kind of the supplement industry, is that they don't bring the story to life. Like they just launch the product like any other product, and they forget about bringing it to life with this whole go-to-market creative strategy, this whole kind of like integrated products, and like how do you kind of make this an experience where then somebody gets it and they are, especially if we're talking about nostalgic or something like that, like they can transport back to the time when they first experienced it and said, this is amazing. Like this really brought me back to a moment that I'll be thankful for of that brand. And then that has such a benefit across the board to getting equity with that customer.
Yeah.
It just seems like there's a laziness on that part of it. You think, oh, I secured the license. And maybe sometimes people get outside of their bounds, like you said, with their budgets, and they realize, holy crap, like I'm not going to be able to make any money on this. So they temper a lot of that go-to-market stuff. But it just seems like it's, oh, let me go sell this to X retailer. Let me put it in the product and let's, that's good enough for me. And I would just think, wow, how like boring has that gotten? Like, I'm excited for like what you said, like you guys are spending substantial time thinking about how do we bring this to life? How do we make this sing? Because I think that's what, for me at least, is exciting, because I love stories. I mean, like I'm not a product guy at the end of the day, because I think, oh, does this meet the expectations of the consumer market? And most of the time at this point they do. So like at that point, the product is pretty benign in the sense. So it's always like, okay, what else is out there? What else are they doing that makes them stand out? And that's where I usually lean into with some of this stuff. So I'm excited, you
You're gonna
mentioning
love
that.
this. I'm
Yeah,
telling you, you're gonna love this. Nothing's been done like this before, and I think our go-to-market strategy here, and especially the timing of it all makes sense. And so, like, we've been on a really tight timeline to get this launched in September for a number of reasons. And so, the team is working really hard on this one. It's going to come down to the last minute, but I think you guys are going to be really impressed with this.
I'm excited. So let's talk. You mentioned briefly Merica Labz, and I am definitely not the person that, like the clown brands, this like zombie brands, the whatever. Like, I get it, but
Yeah,
I
yeah.
also, what I want to ask you though, is this like a part of your like alter ego? Is it a part of your personality? Like, is there something
Listen,
in there with this
all
that you were
five
like,
brands that are under like the Crush It brands right now have a small portion of like my personality in them, right? And that's what's so cool because they have such each of them have a very distinct customer. There's definitely overlap. I mean, like let's not get it twisted. I mean, there's definitely overlap in the consumer a little bit, but like you go to like the Arnold Classic and you know who's an arms race guy. They're
hmm,
wearing Vans shoes, short shorts, and a flannel, right? Like the core team, they're wearing polos, right? Really buttoned up. Chris's team, he's got tattoos all over. The Merica guy's got a mullet, right? Like there's a very distinct customer here. And so for Merica Labz, the impetus was the insane clown with the eyes being gouged out and the skull and cross on the thing that, right, people would come into our store and purchase it because, wow, this is a cool label. Like, I want to get jacked up. And we didn't have that for core, very vanilla, very clinical, like, and we're like, well, we can do that, but we can actually do it with a good formula that's a non-prop blend that follows all the same core principles of core, but be over the top in the marketing. And it was a perfect timing. It was Trump Hillary, right? It was
yeah.
2017, and Red, White, and Boom just kind of went viral right off the rip, and Stars and Pipes, and that brand grew well beyond our expectations. Right off the rip, and that's a brand that I don't know if we have any grand visions of it growing to be this 8-9 figure brand. It's just not going to happen, but it's a fun brand. It's a fun creative outlet for us. And in fact, we just got in today our July 4th drop, which I think is absolutely hilarious. We might get in trouble over it, but I think our consumer is going to absolutely love our new nighttime sleep and recovery formula called Sleepy Joe. And it goes hard. It goes hard. It is what it is, right? And so we have a lot of fun with that brand. And that brand was really we saw what other people were doing, and it was getting, consumers to buy it that first time, but they had trouble buying it the second time. We wanted to give them, hey, that's funny. I kind of like, I latch on to the patriotism and I'm going to buy it. And then they're going to have a great experience because of our core values and what we put into our products. So they'll buy it again. Right. And so that was really how Merica Labz kind of was born. And then it spun off into the energy drink company, which is a whole other conversation.
Yeah, that's where I was going to kind of go with it, because I was wondering, I mean, you obviously have now realized, hey, I don't know, the ceiling is pretty, we think is lower on this brand, and we're just going to have fun with it or wherever. But that was the brand you decided to go off and try to search for the beverage mirage out there. And you guys made a run at it. I mean, I thought the product was great, but you, over a period of time, decided to discontinue it.
Yeah. A
Trying to think
lot
of
of
like a,
lessons learned there. I'll tell you that.
yeah, I mean, I think that it's probably good to talk about a few of them. When you guys launched it, I remember one of the pieces of content you guys did was like a funny kind of thing on Bang Energy, and this was the time when Bang Energy was like at its peak of growth, and like it was just going crazy. And I remember laughing at the piece of content you guys created, because I was like, this is funny. But then why I'm bringing that point up is like there's a new batch of, I would say like supplement entrepreneurs that look at the success of C4 Energy, Ghost Energy, Alani Nu, and they go, well, if they could do it, we could do it, which is partly true. But I also think there's way more things to consider. There is, a huge graveyard of people that have tried and have been unsuccessful that nobody really mentions to it, because you only look at the outlier stars and you go, well, I do it. So then you have all these people piling into it, and I sit back and I think, man, you're gonna hate that decision. That was not the best decision.
Yeah. So I can speak to a lot of that. So first off, so this was 2018. We loved Monster. Monster was always the Monster Ultra, the grape, the white Monster, all of that. That's what we were going after. At the time, there was literally Bang, Monster, and at the same time, I think Pro Sups tried to do one.
Yep.
And BSN tried to do one, like an Endo Rush, I think, at the same time. Those two failed. We came out right at that same time, and we got a lot of traction. I mean, our first year of business, to do into the seven figures in the first year of business, we knew nothing about beverage. Beverage is so different than supplements. We were just a bunch of supplement goons just trying to do beverages because we like energy drinks. We would drink energy drinks at the office, and that's why we wanted to do it. And we also thought the marketing America spoke very much to the energy drink consumer sitting in a NASCAR race, right? And so we started to promote it in certain areas and stuff like that. And for us, I really wonder where America Energy would have gone if COVID / the year that was the summer of 2020 never happened. Because we were really starting to get some placement. We were starting to get C-store placement, gym placement, all of this. And then, well, you know what happened in 2020. And so basically all the distribution, you have to have distribution. And we were in the sports supplement distribution, and we were just starting to get C-store. All of that died. It went away, right? But also the tone of America went away,
Yeah.
right? So now our consumer, we were over the top patriotic. We weren't right or left. Obviously, if you polled our consumer, most of them were probably, we're probably 3/4 right of center, right? Maybe 80 or 90% right of center. But we never were political. We were patriotic. We'd make fun of the left. We'd make fun of the right or whatever. But then everyone thought we were the American flag became offensive. Presidents were being canceled. Like, what the heck? Our jacked up presidents were somehow being canceled and their statues torn down. Like I don't get it. So we had a real heart to heart. So we basically stopped everything because of COVID. And then we're like, well, this is a great let's bring it back. Right. But let's try to do it cleaner. Let's try to make it a little bit more serious. Let's try to appeal to other people. Right. Because there was some deals that we started when we started pitching this. We were having, when we repitched it, when we relaunched it, it was just more of a flag. There were the Jack presidents were gone. The funny write-ups were still there, but it was more of like this clean, more sophisticated CPG look, something that might appeal to both sides. But very quickly, we found that the flag in 2021 was still offensive. We lost a really big gym chain because they literally told us, like, this is offensive. And I'm like, what? The flag's offensive? And my mind was blown. It was a West Coast chain, so that might explain a lot of it. But my mind was blown. And so we had a real hard time. We learned a lot from our previous, but we had a hard time getting placement after we toned down. And we even did that with our supplements. And then Merica Labz sales started to go down in 2021 because we were no longer this kind of hardcore brand. We were trying to be everything to everybody. We don't want anyone to be offended by, our craziness, right? So, but what we found, if you've looked at kind of what we've done more recently and what we're going to continue to do, is we were really, last summer, we had a real hard look at the brand, and we're like, we need to be who we were at the beginning, and we need to stand for what we stand for. And people might hate us, but people might love us. We got to stand for something. We can't stand in the middle. And so we doubled down on that. And that's why, our last Red, White, and Bloom labels, they have the jacked up, really over the top, funny presidents again. Sleepy Joe is going to have the most ridiculous label you've ever seen. It's just we're going to have fun with it. We're not going to be offensive. If you're offended by it, that's on you. And so we're just leaning back into that. And so one of the lessons we learned in beverage was one, is very hard. Two, it takes a lot of money, right? And what I see supplement companies doing now, supplement companies trying to be beverage companies where they take a very profitable supplement brand that probably has really good cash flow, and they're tying it all up into very big minimum runs, right? A low margin product that is very expensive to ship. And you really need to scale. If you're not going to get very quickly, and I believe this, in the 25 to $50 million range within the first year or two of doing business, you probably shouldn't be. And if that, you probably shouldn't be in business in the drink business. And if that number is scary, then for sure, of all the money you have to invest to get there, then you definitely shouldn't be in the drink business. And so that's really kind of what I learned. Like, you have to pay for space. It's very expensive. It's lower margin. And if you really want to scale like that, it's much more difficult. It's much more difficult. And so that's the mistake I see a lot of good supplement brands leaning in. They're probably draining a lot of their cash by pumping it in. So like, if you're going to do a beverage, peel it off, set your funds over there, set your budgets over there, but don't mix it with your supplements, because it's a completely different game.
Yeah, you threw out those numbers and people might have gawked at it, but that's actually the right number. I always tell people 50 million is usually around the break even in terms of beverage that you start to make money. And then, you're looking at a few multiples of that before you start to sniff M&A activity from large beverage conglomerates, because that's only the size at the point where it makes sense for them to put it into their big system. So like, if you're not willing to take it to that level, it's just a hobby a lot of times. Like, it's not going to really do anything, because there's not a lot of people that want to buy, a $10 million beverage brand or something like that, because it doesn't make any money. And it's just a hobby.
And it's like, it takes up so much space. We had 100 pallets that had bad lids that started popping and exploding. And next thing you know, they're getting mold issues. And I'm just like, so it was a happy day when I was just like, you know what? We have very successful businesses on the supplement side. What are we doing here? Like, let's not muddy the waters. And that was at the end of 2023 and end of 2022. And I put us into energy drink jail for at least until 2025. And I told my team, I was like, if we're going to do this, we're going to do it because we want to do it. And it's going to be like a low, almost like a drop culture, like a small thing. I mean, like, don't expect this to be a $50 million brand. We're going to do it on a very small scale. I'm not going to try to put it into every C-store, but we're going to bring out the most crazy flavors that people love, like the Victory. I get emails every week about, like, when do you bring the Victory, the cream soda back, right? Now, I don't think we're doing it in 2025 either, but, I did put us in jail for a while.
It's a good idea. But want to talk about some of the other brands, because those are, in partnership with different people, and wanted to know, one, like, how do you approach those? Because each one of them are, I think the people behind them are very different from personality standpoints. They're obviously their fingers on a lot of the brand as well. Like, it's not just you and your expression of your, needs and wants and how you want to kind of bring that to life. You have to kind of play that around with the different partners. Like, how do you approach that? Like, what do you consider success? Like, how do you make sure that the standard is to your liking, and how do you, pick the partners that you pick?
Yeah. So, I mean, I've had the opportunities now over the last 2 years. There's probably been 8 different people that have come to me wanting to do a brand. And I've turned them down after, doing due diligence. Not that they were bad people or whatever. It just didn't make sense. It didn't fit. It didn't feel like it could live on its own and be its own niche. It wouldn't directly compete with us, all the other brands. So like, yeah, I said there was overlap in customers, but I really think they each have their own pocket where they can exist, and we can do different things for each of the brands. So that's important. The partner himself or herself has to be aligned with my core values. That's uncompromisable for us, right? Like, we have 12 core values here. And the first conversation, I had with Chris was literally like, okay, like, Chris was somebody that I looked up to in the industry. He was somebody that I could see partnering in, because he had a very clear vision of what he wanted. And it was kind of different from our other brands in certain respects. And I said, well, listen, there's a couple things that are just, I can't compromise on. And I literally spent an hour going through all our core values. And then I spent an hour going through this is how we run our business, right? Like, this is how we treat employees. This is how we pay employees, all of those things. And I was very upfront. Like I was almost trying to have the conversation with him to say no, right? I needed to make sure. And it was the same thing with Julian 5 years ago. You know, he had some opportunities to go with some other really large places and who wanted to do a brand for him. But I was like, this is how it's going to be. And, you know, for them, for the arms race and Julian and the unmatched for Chris, I see myself more as a facilitator, right? Like my goal is to put together the teams and the logistics and the financing and everything around it to tell their story, right? And to make sure that they come out in their products, but also that if, heaven forbid, Chris or Julian got hit by a bus, the brand itself could stand on its own based on the quality and the story and the people that we pulled together. So if I can't do that, then I don't want to be a part of it. If they don't have that compelling story and they're not aligned with the core values, then it just doesn't make sense. The acquisition of Myoblox was completely kind of a different opportunity that kind of fell into my lap when Steve Salmon brought it to me. And, you know, he told me that the founder, John Foster, was coming back to be involved, which was really important to me because that was a brand that I sold in our stores, did very well, very unique, very much one of the first of the drop cultures, limited edition. They were kind of a pioneer in that. And for me, it was really important to have John on board with that because, you know, he was involved in the brand and then he kind of disappeared for some years, but having him involved, that founder, that storyteller, I think was really important in kind of getting that brand back to where it was, you know, in 2018, something like that. So, but at the end of the day, it comes down to the core values and the people and the structure of the organization. I'm very upfront, and it's like this is the way it has to be because my people here are the most important thing. And if that's not going to work, then it's cool. We can still be cool, but we're not going to do a brand together.
Because you're, at least my assumption is, you know, the back end of the business, or, you know, you're very systems oriented, or you have, you know, this process and you have, you know, everything kind of set up in that way. Is the expansion of these like partnership brands, is that something that can go on further than this? Or are you at like capacity at this point and saying like, there's too much going on?
Whenever I say, yeah, that's good, you know, like there's always potentially more, but it has to make sense. And there is I don't ever want to dilute myself enough. I need to make sure that if we are going to continue to expand, that the team around me continues to expand and can handle all this. So every time there is an opportunity, I look at, we don't have an official board here, but there is kind of like an unofficial board of people, close people that I talk to. And I talk to everyone, but most importantly, though, that part of that board, and basically have the conversation. Does this make sense? Should we do this? Is the benefit going to outweigh any of the stress on the company or stress on the individual where they can't perform as well? Is that going to happen? You know, like, so I really read the room. And so like, I have to make sure they're on board or I won't do it. It's not a selfish thing for me. Cause, you know, I know taking on one of these companies, like I'll reinvest for the first, you know, X amount of time anyways. I'm not getting other people are going to get paid before I am, right? Like everyone wants to have equity until they realize that they don't, you know, equity is tied up in millions and millions of dollars of inventory sitting out in the warehouse, right? So, you know, it's a very calculated decision, but the team is very involved in that. But I could see us scaling, you know, like we were talking about and implementing systems. Now I have a demo call after this that's going to make, you know, the sales team more efficient and being able to invoice, you know, and tie systems together and multiple brands across different P&Ls and all this stuff and help us run a lot more efficiently. So we have some good people here trying to continue to set us up to be able to expand.
And just talking about just all that, you know, kind of chaos. I'm always just kind of interested how people balance, you know, the multiple businesses and then personal life. And I think that, and this has been probably something that's been, you know, a lot bigger of a point of interest of me lately because of just having a child, you know. So it's one of those situations where, like, you know, just the ability to balance somebody like myself that's highly ambitious, that like has these humongous ideas constantly, and then also understanding that, you know, my son doesn't care really much about any of that. He just cares about, you know, time access and all that kind of stuff like that. And just trying to figure out, like, people that do that successfully or have figured out ways to do it, you know, some way successfully, like How do you do it? How do you kind of find time to make everything a priority?
I don't. I fail. But I think I try pretty, like I'm not gonna be honest and say it's all perfect, right? But I think most importantly, right off the rip, is you have to have good communication with your partner, right? Like, so like all these conversations, whereas like I consider Steph, my wife, part of the board, right? Like she's actually probably the most important, she's the head of the board, right?
Yeah.
And so it's just like, because she knows any new venture we go into is going to be maybe less time, at least in the beginning, for me, right? With them. And so having them equally yoked and at least understanding your drive and what you're trying to accomplish here. And like she understands, like we're doing other things. We're building out, we just opened a physical therapy and athletic development center
Mm.
here. So like we're trying to build and we just opened 2 gyms, right? Like we're trying to build a legacy for our kids. And so she understands that, right? Like I don't want my kids to have to work the 9 to 5 that I did, or the 6 to 12, whatever it is, So like we want to build that. And so having an understanding spouse is really important, but a lot of that comes down to communication. I'm not the greatest at it sometimes, right? So like that's always, a work in progress. And I think the key is just setting boundaries and being as present as you can in every given moment. That goes back to our crush it lifestyle. So when it's dad time, and again, not perfect. I'm not claiming to be perfect, right? Like, because I will have my phone. This is like the worst
Yeah.
piece of crack there is, right? Especially being mobile and being able to CEO of multiple businesses, you have to be on that. So it's hard, but I really try to put that away. And when I'm with my kids, it's with my kids. And I also set really good boundaries. Like, when we were trying to set up this podcast, I was like, my best time is 11 to 4. That is literally my office hours. I'm working before, I'm working after. I never shut off, but pretty much every day you can find me here because like I got kids sports in the afternoons. I'm doing all these other things. I still keep up with my training because if I'm not healthy, then none of these businesses are healthy. So that is a boundary that you have to set up. Now, sometimes those boundaries are not going to be what you want and you got to work to get there. Like I think the problem with today is that everyone feels that they have the right, it is their right to have those boundaries from day one. But
Yeah.
like, I put in the work for 20 years to set up these boundaries. And I try to teach our young employees that like in your 20s, especially if you're single, there's no better time to work your butt off. Like literally, if you're not working 80 hours weeks and learning what comes out of that, then you're really missing out and you're not setting yourself up for your 30s and your 40s and your 50s to have a great life and a great, family life. So for me, it's like, and that's why we try to preach to our younger people, like now's the time to grind. And then later on, you can set up better boundaries. And so I try my best. I'm not perfect at it. We were on vacation in Mexico last week. And sure enough, within the first 24 hours, I wrote it down on a notepad in my phone because it was so comical. My wife and I were laughing about it. With the first 24 hours, like 4 dire things came up that only I could handle, right? Or I had to deal with. So, it's just part of being an entrepreneur. So you keep striving to be better at it. But I've learned it's the communication with your spouse, and it's setting those boundaries of, like your own boundaries. And just knowing that sometimes things are going to be hard. You're going to have to grind in a certain period of time. But again, that goes back to having an understanding spouse.
Love it. Appreciate all of that. The candor. That was good. I don't think I have anything else for you. I mean, I honestly want to be respectful of your time because I said I'd grab an hour. But I want to thank you for everything you shared, Doug. It was great to get to know you a little bit better. I'm glad that this is
Absolutely.
maybe the first step to learn more.
Siri just yelled at me here.
Siri's like, get
It
off
must be
that thing.
time
You
to get
got
off. It must
got
be time
another
to get off.
call. Get out of here.
You said no problem. I guess she was answering you. Yeah, no, it was great. It was great. And I'm sure, we'll talk more soon.
I hope you enjoyed this YouTube video. If you did, consider hitting that like button to support me. Also help me get to my new short-term goal of 4,000 subscribers by hitting that subscribe button. I'd love to see you join me on this journey, but we need to fix the fact that I think slightly over 90% of you that are watching this YouTube video right now are not subscribed to my channel, and that makes me extremely sad. But I do want to thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you on the next one.